Okay, welcome back to the Concert Honesty Podcast. This is episode number 156 with my guest, for his third time back, Adam Tendler. Adam's a good friend of mine who I've come to actually know through this podcast and through a mutual friend of ours, Adam Slinsky. Adam Tendler is a piano player, teacher, artist, sort of one of the foremost interpreters of John Cage's music, Julius Eastman's music, Robert Palmer. He's just a good friend. He's been sort of my quarantine buddy, texting throughout all of this stuff, just keeping each other sane. So I always enjoy talking to Adam. I think this is his third time back on the podcast, and I hope you enjoy it as well. Okay, we'll talk to you soon. Take care. This is Adam Tendler. Talk to you soon. Bye. Well, let's gavel this to order, Adam Tendler.
Yes.
We are now, boom, on the record with the Concert Honesty. And this is not your first time. This is your second, third? What is this?
This is my fourth.
Fourth. Okay. We've maybe done two in person and one coronavirus, or maybe we've done two coronavirus podcasts. I can't remember, but
I think one. I'm honored that I feel like I'm less a guest and more just a character now.
You're a bit player on the podcast.
I think I am. I'm just one of the cast members.
Well, I'm. This is sort of a last minute request on my behalf that we do this, and I'm grateful for it. And I've been, I've been thinking a lot about this sort of pandemic. There's all the issues going on in the world that we don't need to delve into any of the private stuff we've been talking about offline. But I think I'm curious how many people out there have like a pandemic buddy. And I feel like, oddly, you and I, like you are somebody who throughout this whole thing, I've checked in with just, I don't even know why it started from the beginning, just to be like, hey man, how's it going? And like, we've sort of been doing that, having my friend Mike Kent from Ohio, he and I do something similar, and we call it our senior coffee. Like, how like old guys get together at McDonald's and sit around a table and drink their 62-cent coffee.
Yeah, exactly.
That's sort of what I feel like you and I have been doing. And I'm just kind of curious now, not that the pandemic is over. There's certainly issues in the world right now that are causing a lot of heat and pressure, like racial tensions and whatnot. I'm curious, though, just sort of like, I don't want to avoid those conversations because I think they're important, but I'm kind of curious just to sort of take your temperature on how you've seen yourself progress from the beginning of this pandemic. For me, I was really trying to sort of do the podcast to be like a ring of a tree as we go through this, to be like, if I can have some data point every day to look back and be like, oh wow, that's how my thinking on this evolved. And that's kind of when I texted you last night to be like, I have a prompt, it's going to be easy. I don't want you to talk about anybody else. I don't want you to tell me what you think about race or how people should be talking about these issues. Like, those are way too thorny and way too fraught with anxiety, at least for myself right now, for the two of us to try to figure out. But I'm just kind of curious to step back and be like, how have you personally been, if you were to sort of look back at your data points and assess just objectively what's been going on with you personally, how would you say that you've fared?
It's sort of like, for me, it's sort of like when you see a map of the floor of the ocean, and sometimes there's like these very, dramatic hills, and there's a plateau, and then sometimes there's like this trench. Mm-hmm. And I would say that I've probably bottomed out in a trench maybe 2.5 times.
When you say bottom out, what does that mean for you?
For me, I would say that that's like, I am questioning every choice I've made to lead me to this point in my life, and with tinges of regret. A bottoming out feeling of like, this is going to be hard to get out of bed today. And what's interesting is like, I would say before pandemic, that would maybe happen like once a year. I would be like, okay, well, this is that point. There's that moment of the year where I get in the weeds, I spin out, and I'm going to like, doubt everything. But it's interesting that over this lockdown, there have just been, I think, 2 or 3, like I said, 2.5 sort of distinct moments where I was like, oh shit, like this is tough and I don't really know how to navigate out of this. The first time, it was probably close to when we had talked the first time.
Mm-hmm.
I think at that moment, I was feeling a lot of professional doubt. I think I was feeling that if there was any kind of momentum of my life in music, if my work had been building a sort of sandcastle or some sort of like thing upon which things were logically building upon each other,
Mm-hmm.
that was just dashed, and that I was feeling a sense of actual grief in a way of like of kind of that momentum, and a sort of selfishness because of course there was, and this is a theme that's continuing through, of like feeling bad for myself and then feeling guilty about feeling bad about for myself.
Mm-hmm.
So in that moment, unlike say last week where it was about grief and feeling bad about myself, but also realizing that and feeling guilty about that because there's huge social issues that I can barely wrap even one hand around. You know what I mean? Feeling guilty about that and feeling like arrogant for even thinking about myself in that context way back. It was because people were dying. Like so many people were dying so fast, and there were so many sirens, and it was just like a kind of hellscape. And I was like,
Which I want to point out for folks who maybe don't know, like you live in New York.
I live in New York and I live in Brooklyn. Yeah.
There's a lot of, I don't want people to misread when I say ignorance, because I don't mean that in a negative way. There's no way for someone to understand. I mean, you can get on Facebook and be like, well, I don't see any diseases here, like whatever. And I don't think that person may be saying the truth. Like they may be living in the middle of in the wooded area in a rural place. Yeah, right. And like, they're just telling what they see. And then they get pounced on for being like, you're inconsiderate. But it's like also impossible for them to know what it feels like to be living in New York and be living in a 200 square foot apartment and hearing sirens all day, and the anxiety that brings, because it is different here, you know, like, right. So anyway, just to point out, like, your data point is just objectively going to be different than someone who lives in the middle of Wyoming, you know, and it's not better or worse. It's just a different thing.
It's just different. And our local news is different. And the reports of casualties is different. And for a good month or so, it was really intense because it was just like, here's how many people died in your city. And it was interesting to be like, oh, we're not talking about a different place. I'm talking about like my city, like right here. And when I go to the store, I'm in sort of interfacing with that thing, you know, this thing that's killing people. Anyway, in the beginning, there was just a moment of feeling like, all right, if I'm gonna stay in music, I need to do it for the reasons that I came to music in the first place, and I need to sort of like, if it has to do with loving music, okay, great, and sharing music in some way, okay, great. And if that's the only germ, if those are the only germs I can work with, then I have to be okay with that going forward. So I kind of crawled out of that in a way, but it was a moment of feeling, and this is something about some of those bottom out periods. It felt very, and I'm not proud of this, it felt very personal in terms of like resenting other people, like very personally.
So, I mean, if you don't, I mean, don't name names, but and I wouldn't assume. I don't. Yeah. Well, you and I do privately, but that's the other thing too. Like, I feel like it's important to have a friend you can say the crazy shit to. Like the stuff that is not moored in reality or sanity or any of the sort of foundational beliefs I think a society should be moored upon. I also I appreciate that you're one of these, I'm sorry, but you're one of these people in my life who I can just say the most absurd thing to, because I need to get it out, because it's in there for whatever lizard brain part of me there is that's holding on to some irrational thing. And you're not the only, there's many people in my life, not many, there's a handful of people in my life like that, but I am so grateful for that. And I feel like social media gives you this sort of impression that that's not that doesn't happen. And I'm like, I know you all have people who you are saying crazy shit to, like, you know, and so that anxiety does build up.
And at no point, even when I was experiencing it, and usually if I even dare share it,
Please.
it's usually framed in the caveat of like, I am fully aware that this is an irrational reaction. Like very few times have I ever even thought any of my like feelings were actually rational or like, you know, grounded in any kind of um, like valid. It's valid because it's happening, but it's not valid. It's not like I can argue with it and really work with it, or most of all, do something constructive with it. So anyway, the first time had to do with that. I kind of crawled out. And yeah, and another thing that can help is feeling like there's a goal or there's something that, like right now, maybe your priorities and your, if you're creating content for Soci, that actually just, in a way, it like hovercrafts over your life, and then you have to start like doing other stuff in it, and in a way that can be good because you're not left with your thoughts and the big picture questions, which are never going to be solved like super quick, and so all you can do is like spin. So like doing live streams and having like short term goals and suddenly, yeah, and deadlines has helped.
I want to ask you something about, you said like, and again, please don't feel like you have to name names. But when you said you had personal resentment towards people or a specific people, again, like, please no, I'm not trying to get like, I'm not trying to dox somebody here on this podcast, but like, I'm curious about that feeling of yours because I don't 100% identify with that exact feeling, but I partially do. Like, I mostly understand in terms of my experience. Like, I have found myself having feelings that, like, I keep thinking my therapist, like 101, the very first session is like, just so we're clear, your feelings aren't proof of anything.
Right.
They're only proof of how you feel. And right, so like, exactly. if you can't agree to that, then we're not going to be able to get much done here. Right. And like that, I've had to remind myself of that many times because I see someone advocating for something that I feel like they should be doing something else. Somebody has an opinion. I feel like, you know, or I just see someone being successful during the pandemic, or I see someone being lazy during the pandemic and I get pissed and I'm like,
that too, yeah.
Whatever. I'm curious for you though, like what was it that, like, is there something specific you can say that is like, man, this is exactly what was happening?
You know, I feel like I am tangentially, I feel like I can't think of the right word, but adjacent, I guess is the word I'm looking for, to a lot of people whose careers I really admire. And I feel like I'm very close to those people. And I think someone from the outside might look at me and be like, dude, you are one of those people. I don't know why you're creating. But for my sake, I actually do have a very clear boundary between what I think is happening with me and what I think is happening with person A, B, or C. Mm-hmm. And I think when all this shit was going down in the beginning, and I was starting to feel like my battleship was sunk and my momentum was sunk, for me, I had very like, it was really more envy than resentment. I mean, it's two sides of the same coin, but I was sort of just like, I don't want to hear about your professional doubt because I think you're professional. You know, I was just sort of doing that in my head. And what I was ashamed of was these are my closest friends. It was like, and I really shut myself off. Like I kind of went dark. Like I just wasn't responding to, and people were like, are you okay? And I just didn't even, I just was, it's not mature and it's not rational, but I felt in a way like just jealous and hurt in a way, and pretty hopeless. I've crawled out of that, but it's the thing over the last, it's funny because then sometimes it's just creeped in. There was, I think we went away for Memorial Day, and in the days leading up, I think I started to get really freaked out about leaving the house.
You went to Vermont, right?
Yeah. And it was funny because it was my idea. And this shows why I'm like an impossible person to be married to, for starters, is because Francesco, my husband, was sort of, he saw evidence of people in Vermont really lashing out at people with New York plates and stuff like that. And people were really, one was race related, and then there's others that weren't. And it was a real shame for the state. Like, it became a thing in the state. And Vermont, by the way, has has a Republican governor who's actually very outspoken against Trump, actually, and is very, like, he actually just did a very impassioned sort of plea for Black Lives Matter and for George Floyd. So he's like, you know, as Bill Maher calls it, Republican classic. Like,
but your point that Vermont is not an uncomplicated state. I mean, it's not as simple as being like, oh, it's Vermont, Ben and Jerry's, they must be libertarians. It's like there's a lot of economic disparity in Vermont that you're not aware of.
Correct, and even when you go into sort of like trademark liberal cities, like let's say Portland, Oregon, or something like that. Usually, if you talk to anybody, they'll say, "Oh, it's really complicated, but it's really under the surface," and blah 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 blah. In Vermont, it's like not under the surface. It's like very clear. Like people have Confederate flags like bizarrely outside of their. Because I say bizarre because you're in no way part of the Confederacy when you're in Vermont, but it's a way of sort of like people, in my opinion, asserting that they're a race. Like, I'm just letting you know I'm racist by putting this thing outside, and that might be really unfair.
But even if that's let's assume for 2 seconds
I shouldn't say that.
No, it's fine. But I mean, again, this is you and I are friends, and I know what you mean, and I don't give a crap if anybody else doesn't know what you mean. I think whether or not they are, like, let's assume for a second they're not. Let's go the step lower than that. To me, what I mean when I see the Confederate flag in my home state, and I know what little I know about that culture and the sort of ideology behind it, it's not 100% racism. Sometimes it's just leave me the fuck alone. Like it is a sense of like, this is my place. Now, the symbology of the flag, all of that stuff is absolutely. When people point out what it relates to, that's absolutely appropriate. It is definitively the flag of the South, and we won. Like, if you want to support the troops and you love the U.S. flag, like if you're that upset about kneeling against the national anthem at the NFL, then you need to let go of the Confederate flag. Like, I'm sorry, that is that's a thing. But sometimes I think people use that as a like. I'm just like, leave me alone. Don't tread on me. I don't want to be talked to, and that can be a slightly nuanced thing from just I'm a racist, you know.
Right, and I think I can even create a whole narrative, as is my want, of like, I'm sure that if I engaged someone who has a Confederate flag in Vermont, again, the absurdity of it being in Vermont, which is like the most northern of the northern states, I think that's just why I think it's funny. And
it's like if somebody in Georgia had a Vermont state flag flying out. So, I mean, it's like, what the fuck's wrong with you? Like,
but what's funny is that, to your point, let's say I knocked on that person's door, and if I was a really brave and, you know, person of true integrity, maybe I would do that before actually, in my mind, just checking off the racist box. And they might actually say, "Actually, dude, I'm from Georgia, and that flag means this, this, and this to me. And here's my They may be raging. Friends.
They may be white supremacists and Nazis. I don't know. I'm just.
Or they're white supremacists.
Yeah, I mean, all of the things are possible. You know.
I think what's interesting is that, like, and we've talked a little bit about this. Let's say that there's a very, not to make this all about this random people in Vermont with Confederate flags, but it's almost like the conversation in the national sort of dialogue, or how things are dialogued on, doesn't really allow me, or really, it's not going to allow for the nuance or even the fleshing out of that. Everything is a bit binary right now, and so if I put a Confederate flag on my car, I could have so many reasons for that, but because there's been a binarization of our thinking, I think, in our culture and our society, it doesn't matter what my reasons are. 9 out of 10 people are going to look at it and think that one thing, which I just did 3 minutes ago. You know what I mean? And so that's an interesting thing about this moment that I think can be troubling, is because the rules, in a way, have sort of been defined, and those rules of how we even engage each other, or even engage things happening, the rules have been defined. Just, I think they have, and one has to really play by them, or suffer sort of the consequences. Like, not like it's some consequence I can't put a Confederate flag on my car, but which I don't want to.
I think that's clear to me and should be clear to my listeners that you're not that. And if anybody wants to take issue with that, they're more than welcome to. But again, your feelings about Adam Tendler and the Confederate flag aren't proof of anything about Adam Tendler.
I'm so glad we can have this podcast today so we can establish that I'm itching to have a Confederate flag on my car. That's why I've gathered us here today. No, I mean, but I'm blushing. No, but my point is it's insignificant what I think. And I think that say the extreme example of a Confederate flag, you could take it with many less extreme examples of things that actually might be really worth fleshing out. And it seems, maybe impossible isn't the word, but kind of emotionally dangerous or perilous, or somehow there's to not actually engage in a very binary way with things. So I think that's a part of a frustration that, if I'm going to say there's been a third bottoming out, that second one was when we were about to go to Vermont. Again, sorry to wrap this up. Wrap up that thing is, I really wanted to go. Francesco actually became a little bit nervous about the whole people freaking out on our car thing, and he was like, I don't know if we should go. That somehow made me like, and I think this also just shows that right now things are very raw and they can make emotions do things that are not even explainable. I just was upset for like 3 days about that, and he didn't do anything wrong. He literally said, I don't know if we should go, and I just got so upset. Like really upset. And what's the weirdest irony is that then we did go, and then I got kind of weird about going, because suddenly I was like, I actually am realizing, as much as I complain about feeling isolated and like stir crazy, I'm actually feeling very safe in my routine here. And the idea of leaving feels like frivolous, a little bit decadent. Like, we don't have to go. I think our fish is going to miss us. Like, is this a good idea? And like suddenly that became a thing. I would call that the half. I said there's been 2.5 bottom out. That's half one because it's so bizarre and mysterious and there's no point to it. The third one is happening like literally right now.
I think that's what you and I have been. I think we're sort of having a simultaneous bottoming out together, and so we're holding hands and jumping into the empty swimming pool together.
and I would say it's been for the last few days, and it's come with its commensurate like guilt, because for every time I start to feel like raw and upset, I start to think I have no right to feel anything, because I mean, how in a way, how white of me to actually look at what's going on in the world and be like, what about my feelings? About my pride? And so I'll do that too, where I'm just like, the truth of the matter is, and I've said it to you before, is that there's the part of me that had an aha moment that saw that over the last couple of weeks, there's been a clarification on my end of just what I feel from each like side. Of course, there's no side that says racism is okay. Okay, let's all we get that. Again, someone might argue with me and say, you don't get that, and here's why you don't get that. Okay, fine. But let's just say that I can say that obviously I'm not debating whether or not racism is okay, but some of the language of what to do in terms of helping, solving, progressing, and healing, and changing, all of those things, and who has to be engaged on that, from police to artistic institutions, which I don't know if anyone in the world is thinking about that except us, because it's our field. Francesco's dealing with that in fashion, because he works in fashion. So right. He was sort of surprised that I was even saying this was happening in my field. He's like, what? And I was like, in my world, it's like, oh, is this happening anywhere else except my field?
Well, I mean, this is the thing. This is the danger of social media. I think, not only are our own personal beliefs siloed in social media, our economies are, in terms of the fields that we interact in, are also siloed. And this is something that has happened. It didn't happen overnight. It didn't happen yesterday.
What does it mean, siloed?
Siloed means you are like you've blocked somebody, so therefore you have less and less opposing viewpoints, and you just become sort of stuck in this. Your family tree is a trunk. There's no evolution. There's no dissenting opinion in terms of what it is that the information you're receiving. And so you see it with, it's why I'm so gobsmacked when people think I'm crazy when I say that Trump could have won in 2016. It's because in 2015, every one of my friends, not every one of them, but a vast majority of them went down the whole hashtag blocked and blessed sort of tour. Like anybody who has a dissenting opinion, I'm blocking them. And so then they got this outsized perception or impression that Hillary Clinton was going to win because they were hearing nothing other than that. And I think as it pertains to all of these issues going on right now, the fact that social media is the tool by which the predominant mode of communication is happening, I'm trying to be real careful right now, just as a person, to protect. I understand all the guilt you're saying. I have it too. I've been thinking about my own whiteness since the first time I went to Trinidad and was smacked in the face with it. And I still am thinking about it. I don't know how to. I don't know what the answers are all the time. But when you enter the sort of sphere of social media, everybody has a flamethrower. Right. Everybody. And it doesn't matter whether you've thought about the issue or not, or whether or not you're an expert. Paul Krugman has the same flamethrower that I do. Right. Donald Trump has the same flamethrower I do, except he can reach 13 million people. I don't. It's just it's this really strange battle that, frankly, I think the thing that I've come around to is since the pandemic happened, I've been more aware of what I'm good at and what I'm not. What I can do, where I feel when I bottom out, for me, my first bottoming out was having to reckon with the idea that every decision I've made in the last 15 years of my career was made on the foundation of the fact that I have to travel everywhere all the time. I was always commuting. Every decision I made, every pair of shoes I bought, every pair of pants I bought, is this going to be comfortable on a plane? I'm not kidding. And for me, I was I don't know how to make decisions that involve staying at home now. And I had a whole 2 weeks where I was just pounding rum and cokes and doing podcasts, just trying to talk to anyone who could help me figure out how to make decisions in a new way. Honest to God, dude, that's the only reason I started the podcast, was to be I got to figure out how other people do this, because I don't know how. Yeah. And once I got out of that, after that first, in terms of my first down moment, that's when I organized my office. It was I'm going to set up a studio. Now I can do this. I couldn't do that before. The other the next bottoming out was dealing with this idea oh my God, this isn't a month. This is going to be 3 months. Yeah. Jesus Christ. What? Okay, I've just gotten good about, I've just organized my office. How do I make the next 3 months feel like this is normal? And then you couple on top of it George Floyd and the way naturally the rage people feel. When you throw that on top of the pile, I don't want to say I've gone dark, because I have spent more time on the phone, more time on text, more time on Facebook message and email with my friends in the steel band community than I have in my entire life. Yeah. But I really felt, I was terrified. I still am. I have terrible anxiety about going on social media, other than to say, here's podcasts. And here's the other reason, because I know no matter what podcast I put out, the people who are going to listen to it are going to listen to 14% of it. Because I know the data. I don't need to get emotional about it. It's you can get mad at me about my views on whatever or being absent, but I've put out a 2-hour conversation about race with my friends, and you listen to 13% of it. That's the data I have, and I can prove
see
it.
That?
Yeah. I mean, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, they tell you exactly how many people who have listened, who they are, and
God.
And not their addresses, but what countries they're in, and then how much of each podcast they listen to. I mean, most websites you can get the data on how long someone hovered over top of a thumbnail with their cursor. That's that's what metadata is. You can that's how companies derive their advertising. It's oh my God, that's how Facebook, when you're scrolling through on Instagram and when I stop on an Adidas ad, I don't have to tap on it for Adidas to know that I stopped on their ad. Because Instagram is sending them this ad stopped for 2.5 seconds longer than every other ad this dum-dum's looked at.
Wow.
And so then the next day, I get an Adidas ad.
Wow.
Like this is, it's not, I mean, and again, I don't think that's evil. I think it's just true. Like that's what's happening. And with social media, I feel like we as humans are ill-equipped to identify that. And then when you couple on our evolutionary sort of crutch, which is when chaos happens, we go binary. Like, you fight or flight. That's it. Like this is not, your reactions are not an inhuman thing. You were doing exactly what your ancestors from 300,000 years ago did.
Right.
And it's natural. It's just as terrifying because the world isn't binary. The world is not a 1 or a 0. I mean, yes, some things are, but by and large, shit's way too complicated to say that it's just a 1 or a 0. And that has been the hardest thing for me to swallow about all of this is our chaos forcing us into this sort of like, you're either in the right lane or the left lane, and if you're not, you're Hitler. And I'm like, whoa, hold up a second. Like, that was a huge jump, and I really don't want to live in a world like that.
A plus B equals Hitler.
Right, yeah.
I mean, that's what I was going to say is, like, it's been fine that, engaging in the news and watching how everything's developing, and also taking the temperature of my own neighborhood. I live in Bed-Stuy, which even as it's gentrified, as I am a participant in, I'm aware of that. I've been aware of that for a few years now. That I feel like that my position, my standing in this neighborhood is actually at the really bottom of like the rung, let's say. Because I do feel like I am in part like an intruder here in the culture of my neighborhood. That said, knowing my neighbors, and I know my neighbors all by name, and they know me, and I know the cops, and I know the post worker, blah blah. That combined with the news, and that sense of the temperature of my neighborhood is also just informed and clarified, I think, over the last couple of weeks, I guess. Clarified my take on a lot of the sides of this, and that's where before I was saying, okay, not the side of what is racism's bad, not that, but like defunding the police, saying fuck the police. Do I want to say that? Do I want to say that to that black cop who might save my ass tomorrow? Like, do I want to?
And I think to me it's like it's having to sort of practice being able to hold both ideas in your head. Like you have to be able to, as a human being, say, listen, we need to talk about how the police are funded.
Exactly.
But then also you need to understand that you can't make me go up to a black cop and say defund the police. I just can't. Like,
right.
And we as a society need to accept both of those things.
And how it's been militarized, and how I was reading an article about a lot of the militarization of the police goes back to Clinton. It's not about like this again. It's not a red or blue thing.
It's not a Trump issue. This is all like
exactly. Yeah. I mean, the initiative of like you have to use this military equipment or you lose it or blah blah blah. Again, that's all. Listen, we can all talk about how fucked up so much of that is. But what clarified to me as I started to think, holy shit, this person was murdered in front of people. Like, and it was videotaped and the cops literally didn't care. Like, they felt that powerful. They could, like, I can't believe that like is happening and that I have to put that into my culture and say that that's a part of my culture. Someone was literally like lynched on the street. Making room for that, making room for this. And then my thoughts and have been clarified, but they've also felt, not because I'm so brilliant and nuanced, but it didn't feel like I could have that conversation actually with anybody. Just say like, here's the thing that troubled me about that protest, as well as the thing that's obviously troubling me and keeping me up at night about this murdered man. Like, I couldn't, and it felt like there was literally no one I could actually talk to express that, because I didn't want to hurt anybody. Again, I feel guilty even saying this right now, because it's about making my burden of who do I talk to about
Well, but again, like this is as far as my cognitive dissonance about the way society deals with these issues, as I feel like there's a lot of demand for white people to admit something, and then when when people are genuinely saying, I don't know, here's all the things that I've noticed and this is crazy and I feel so shitty about it, then there's this weird pushback of like, shut up, we don't want to hear your voice. And again, I understand, like, people are entitled to their emotions right now. Like, this is a therapy 101. I am never going to tell someone that what they're feeling isn't valid. Absolutely not. But like, if at some point we have to be able to read intent and practice intent, and if you can't hear someone say out loud, like, I don't understand this issue, and if your only response is fuck you, get out of here, I don't want you on my team, then I like, this is for me where I feel like where I've been afraid to enter the conversation is like, hey, I've been on the record with my podcast for 3 years now, literally having these discussions, saying that everything is more nuanced than we want to give it credence for. And so if like, do you really want to hear it? Because I'll say it again, but it just seems like right now, are you expecting me to say something different than the 155 episodes I'm on the record of doing? Like, I'm like, you expect Trump to act differently after 75 years or whatever, however old he is. Do you expect me to act like, no, I'm going to tell you this stuff is hairier than you want to admit. And I'm going to also tell you that conversations I'm having with my black friends in the pan community might not jive with what you think the narrative should be. Right. It's not always like, if you are to presume that all black people think the same thing, that is also a position of privilege that you're in. Totally. And I feel like right now, and again, that's not something I don't push back when I see people making blatant statements right now about that sort of thing. But I do feel like at some point that we need to acknowledge as a human being that just in the same way, like, you cannot paint with a broad brush about anybody. Right. And we have to, as best we can, to point out, we have to allow for all, like, diversity. Diversity means hearing something from somebody you trust that you don't agree with and having to sit there and deal with it. And if you don't want those sorts of opinions in the room, then I think you just need to say out loud that you don't actually care about pure diversity. You don't care about a diversity of opinion. What you want is compliance of what you feel like is going to make you the happiest. And that's okay. I just want you to say that out loud, because I know a lot of people who don't agree with what you're saying. And you purport to sort of be this advocate, this ally, and it's all in good intention. But I just want you to stop and think for 2 seconds, like, does what you're saying apply to everybody? Do you feel like, as a white person, you should be talking for all black people? Like, let's just talk about that privilege for 2 seconds.
Right, exactly. No, totally. I mean, I think part of my pulling away was that I found that every time I touched this thing that was helping me actually feel connected, and that was helping me take the temperature of my friends and of news, that I was feeling more and more confused, and that I was feeling more and more powerless, fine, but also like, it's just as if everything I was touching was backfiring, and everything felt also super shallow and hollow. So much of what I was seeing looked and felt hollow, but then everything I was thinking that I could add to it also seemed hollow and wrong, and not the whole story. And I kept thinking, like, I don't know really what to do right now, because I want to be participating, but I don't feel like there's an authentic way for me to do this. And then it just started to get a little weird, because suddenly I realized, like, this happened actually with, this is a weird analogy, but it happened actually with my school where I was teaching, 3rd Street Settlement, when everything started closing down. And I think my school was just getting so many ducks in a row that suddenly they were the last institution in New York to be open. And we were all like, are we closed yet? Like, why am I teaching fucking middle C right now? Siren. But it was a similar, where suddenly it got weird at 3rd Street. And suddenly for me with this, suddenly it became like weird, like, oh shit, like, I haven't said anything. Like, I haven't done now I'm feeling kind of weird and guilty about that. Like, what's the right thing? And then what I think I sort of like popped in, I did actually write something, and part of it was like, and I think it was something that I kind of fleshed out in a dialogue with you, where I was realizing like my own, um, I don't know, my own blind spots, let's say, where I think I had said to you like, okay, if gay people or Armenian people or middle, you know, if a minority that I might associate myself with or whatever was like routinely killed, like, and hunted down, and there has been what feels like, and again, there's the quote that it's not increasing, it's just getting videotaped. Okay, but over the last, then let's just say more has been videotaped in the last month and a half between a jogger being hunted and a person watching birds getting called the cops on him in a weaponized way, in a chillingly weaponized way. If she's like, I'm going to say this, and it's like, it's creepy to watch. Okay,
and let's just note that she also donated to Obama. Was a Democrat.
Yeah, no, totally, exactly.
Like, again, it's like this is not this, like, it doesn't fit neatly into the box that most people on the left want you to believe about a racist on the right. Like, I'm sorry, this exists on our side too, just so you know.
But even after that, there was a funny thing, is people would say then really like statements that are also like head scratchers. Like, someone said like, this is the most dangerous racist, is the racist who voted for Hillary Clinton. Like, someone said that as a quote, and I was like, but I'm not so sure that that's the most dangerous racist in the world. Hillary Clinton. Like,
but again, it's like, that's like a right now you have to be like, exactly. You're welcome to your opinion. I just want to put out there, it might be possible that Amy Cooper might not be the same type of racist as, say, Richard Spencer.
Right, exactly.
Like, let's just, can we agree on that? Like, yeah, they're like, different types of
I think
racism.
That there's and I think that there's some who might be more dangerous, which are the ones who are actually like going to try to. But you know, okay. But again, even that became like, oh, I was with you. But that's something that now we're going into like really rhetorical stuff that now sounds kind of goofy, which can also be self-sabotaging on the left. Blah blah blah. But that was what my post was, and I spent a lot of time on it because I was like, I don't even want to say Black Lives Matters once at the end. I want to say it fucking I want to start with it and say it every single time, so it doesn't look like even that I'm. But I was in this 3-dimensional chess mode of like, and part of that came because a colleague and a friend kind of, I don't know, maybe I'm oversensitive, but I did feel like they were challenging me, and I was saying something about how I felt weird. I had posted something that showed a woman reacting to the looting in her neighborhood, but she said it in a really compassionate way, where she's like, I think she said something along the lines of, "This is how I feel. Like, this destruction is how I feel, and here's my." And it was just beautiful. But I put it out, and then again, that 3-dimensional chess part of me said, I think I just put out a black suffering spectacle, and I don't think I should do that. You know, and again, whether I did or not, I started to go spinning out, and I took it down. And this friend sort of, I think, was like, hey, I saw you do that. I saw you do the thing where you put it and it's not there anymore. And
I wish Facebook and social media had like a purgatory where you could post something and it would just sit for 10 minutes. And it wouldn't go public. And you could take, after 10 minutes, you could think about it. You know. Like.
Exactly. No, 100%. And I also felt like I was already in a defensive mode because I had sent a picture of those destroyed pianos to that friend too, which also I guess made me like a Karen and a boomer because I thought that sucked. But so I was already feeling really defensive, like, no, I don't think pianos are people. Fuck, shit, I shouldn't have shared that either. No. Because I was also seeing people spin out online about destroyed pianos and being like, fuck you, you think piano destroying is bad? Well, you're a murderer.
It really unraveled in a way that I was sitting on the outside with like my popcorn going like, oh my God, what's happening here?
So anyway, with this friend, it was after that dialogue, but where they were really challenging, like, and they were like, well, what if someone does think that? Like, what are you going to do? Like, and I was like, well, I would apologize, and I would say that wasn't my intent, and I would explain. They were like, anyway, it just felt for all their good intentions, I felt kind of patronized in a way of like, why are you even talking? Like, it's an example of why I don't want to talk to anybody, because I'm feeling shitty even now. Anyway, that was kind of my post, though, is that I put it out saying, here were my blind spots. Like, if I do think that I would be in the streets, and I do think my social media would be like a scorched earth of memes and like calling to action, blah blah blah, if it was my personal minority. And I was like, well, that might suck. That might mean I suck. Maybe it means that I need to think about and reassess. And this is part of, I think, the positive thing of the last couple of weeks, of that people saying, no, like, reassess how, if you're going to say Black Lives Matter, how have you how has that not been present in your life? And that's where I started. That was like my starting point.
There's a really great, do you know Michael Che, the comedian? I saw a thing where he and I'm going to totally butcher his premise here, but he was like, if you all want to know how we negotiate, our first sort of negotiation, our entrance into the negotiations was Black Lives Matter. It wasn't like matter more. It wasn't like worth more. It was like matter at all. Like that was the entrance into the negotiation. It's like it's flabbergasting to me that like okay, cool. Like, we've tried everything. Can we just start with matters?
Yeah, exactly.
And it's like the idea that is such a hard argument feels like such a hard thing to swallow.
And and talk about a flamethrower that can just like blow up someone's mind, and friendships have been lost over the idea of like actually acknowledging that we actually as a culture need to say that, because there's this loss of Black life that seems to be completely dismissed.
Yeah.
Like on a bureaucratic level. But anyway, my point is, even that, I put that out there and I thought, I think this sucks too. Like, this sucks. And then I shared the thing. What was the Mattis? I shared that.
Oh, that article.
And suddenly, and then I felt like a scab for that. And I just thought, you know what? This isn't working for me. I feel shitty. Like, I feel so fucking shitty. And even my personal communication is feeling shitty because I'm not doing this right. Like, I can't do this. And so I found that I pulled away, and I'm still kind of pulling away. Like, I actually don't really, and that's also been kind of compounded and weird about just in terms of creating, this sounds, again, kind of superficial and trivial, but like, that it's an inconvenient thing to be like, well, I'm pulling away and I don't want anyone to see me, and I want to just like, I want to be off the radar, when like, I actually have commitments to like do a performance and submit a video and blah, 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 blah. And so it's just a kind of a weird moment where I do feel not dissimilar to other points in this lockdown. Like, I just am like I just am sort of isolating and not feeling comfortable around people, and feeling, like I said to you once, and then I really will be quiet, feeling a little bit like looking and seeing people I love and care about, and who I actually can understand what they're saying, all fighting and saying really hostile things to each other on a personal level. As I get emotional, I know that really well, and as someone who wants to fix things and solve things, and who always thinks everything is somehow their fault.
Man, and that's the thing you mentioned,
and they caused it.
You mentioned like ableism you mentioned the word ableism, I think, over text, and again, like I still am not quite fully aware of what the words. I mean, my dad was handicapped in a wheelchair with ALS for 3 years, so like I have some sort of sympathy and empathy with that aspect, but there's a huge assumption with the sort of social media environment that everybody has the same level of anxiety as the next person. And I'll say for me, my tools are unusable if I feel like the only place I can use them is social media. And like, that can't possibly be the type of scenario or the society that people who are fighting for good in the world genuinely want for the best for people. That can't possibly be an end goal, that everybody must participate in social media in this very way. And if you're not, then you're not being a good ally, because I shut down. I completely understand what you're saying, and it's this uncanny valley thing where, like, I feel like I'm really good at reading intent. And I like to surround myself with people who have really, really highly tuned bullshit detectors. And I don't surround myself with people who can't see through the noise, at least 2 feet through the noise. Like, I just don't trust people like that. You're not working hard enough. And, but anyway, just to pivot a little bit, just to wrap it up, I'm curious now, sort of moving forward, something that you taught me about, and that sort of was the first thing that popped in my head the minute you started mentioning that you were having some I don't know, insecurities about how to sort of enter a discussion. You are the person in this world who taught me about Julius Eastman. And we talked about it on a podcast I don't know when it was, 2 months ago or whatever, in person, and you were talking about the issues around his music and about the way people talk about his music, when you program his music. The titles are very I would say they're not controversial to Julius. I never met him, but I would say he doesn't that's his life. And so like, it may be controversial to me or to you, but that was his life. And the way people talked about it, there's a lot of controversy around it prior to all of this. And when I think about you, Adam, in terms of your where like, when people talk about what an ally is and what an advocate can be, I feel like you're someone, and again, that doesn't mean you're not going to get shit from somebody, but I would imagine if Julius Eastman was around right now, he would probably be in the room with you talking about his music, because it's clear to him that you love the shit out of his music, and that like, the fact that you have white skin not that it doesn't matter, and not that you don't have to deal with all the privilege and all that stuff, but like, I don't know how you enter the discussion with Julius Eastman. It is a fraught thing, but you have been an ally and been advocating in ways that maybe aren't completely obvious to you, but I learned about Julius Eastman from you. And I just want to encourage that a little bit in you, to be like, man, the world needs to know about his music. People need to learn about the complexities around how people talk about that. You need many voices in the room, but you're one of them. And I know it's not uncomplicated, but I think you're an important one in that particular discussion. So if that's any buoy in the sea of life to grab onto as we're floating here, like, I do feel like you have a voice in that particular niche lane of our world that does need speaking to, because I'm 40 and didn't hear about that man until just recently. So there's 18-year-olds out there who need to know about Julius Eastman and need to be taught it in a way like you teach. So that's my sort of like elevator pitch for Adam Tendler advocate. You deal with that as you see fit with your own anxieties, but
I will say, before we wrap up, I will say also, and I guess I always seem insistent on ending on pessimistic notes, as you try to always end on an optimistic note.
That's all right.
But I will say that has also felt sort of what you just said, and before Eastman, and that to hear you say that really does mean a lot to me, because it's not just lip service when I say that I really struggle with feeling actually quite like exceptionally worthless lately. I'm
with you. I don't disagree. I think you've been exceptionally worthless recently too, Adam.
Thank you. That's what I needed more. But there also has been sort of a sense of like, we started by talking about resentment and hostility, whether it's rational or not, and whether it's and sometimes it can feel very personal. And then there has been recently a sense of like me in a very like pointed way not sharing my donations, not sharing me going to the things in my community, because I've been feeling very hostile and very resentful of the expectation that in order for that to be validated by literally random people whether I do know or people who aren't in the position to judge or validate me or take my temperature of investment and passion and belief and my own advocacy or activism or that I somehow have to interface with a thing invented by Mark Zuckerberg or a thing that was bought by Mark Zuckerberg or that's competing with Mark Zuckerberg on Twitter. Like that somehow I have to interface with that to let like random person in my mind or like the zeitgeist or this thing out there that's the only way that's going to actually matter or be okay. And that's that's been interesting as it kind of can extend to other things, just even about music. Like if a tree falls, does anyone hear it? If I learn this piece and don't share it, like if I have this really funny thought, but don't share it. If I take this really beautiful picture of this tree at this park and I don't share it, is it okay? And that's been something that I've been sort of just mulling over the last maybe week, where I've really just not wanted to share anything, because I felt like instead of me feeling empowered by sharing my voice or blah blah blah, it's actually felt really the opposite. It feels like I've been giving power to other people, and I've felt really vulnerable and like, I guess, yeah, just hurt and vulnerable, sort of, and not pleasant, not feeling like I'm in control of myself. And so
it's a tricky thing, and I think most people feel the same way, but would never want to say it out loud because they don't want to be called out. And I think it's important for us to really avoid the sort of, and I don't have a better phrase here, the sort of show me your receipts version of advocacy. Like, I really want to caution people against that, for one purpose, that you don't know what receipts the other person has, and you may have your ass handed to you in a way you don't ever want, and it may happen publicly. And I also it's just a punitive way to go through life, and it's dangerous. And I think it shame, like, I don't know, I push back on shame as a motivator. I think it does work in very specific ways. It's not like I've never been motivated by it, but over the arc of my life, the real changes in my life, you don't have to believe me, but I'm telling you, they did not come from shame. Right. I'm telling people that right now, and you don't have to believe me. You can think, because the other thing, shame is easy. Shame is we are not running out of shame. Like, right, exactly. Shame is just pouring out of the faucets, and we can't stop it. So I just don't want to traffic in that. Like, we have there's inflation now in the shame currency, and right. There's too much of it. And I really want to sort of, I want to invest in whatever the Bitcoin version of this, whether it's empathy. Right. Yeah, I'm going to invest there, and
that's a beautiful the way of putting it, of trafficking and currency, and the return might be fast. You know, the return might be immediate, fast, and you might see an effective, like, in that moment change. But I was just talking to, again, this is happening in every field, and I was talking to my husband about it, and I just said, yeah, but for that satisfaction of that flare up, and then this person disappears, the CEO is gone, poof. But is that going to create the long-term thing? It might have felt really good, and it might have been that shame and that might have been really effective in making that person go poof. But did that poof, like,
I feel like we need
in the long run,
we need to sort of create a, like, in the way that I want social media to have a purgatory thing where it sits for 10 minutes before it goes live. Like, we need to have if you've actively been responsible for canceling a CEO, you are now the CEO for at least a month. I want you to know that doesn't. And again, I'm not saying the CEO wasn't a piece of shit. I'm not saying they weren't doing horrible things, and I'm not saying you would be a bad CEO. But I do think people need to have an idea of what it is they're demanding and know what it is, the realities, like what's possible in those positions. And again, like, it's accountability. That's what I'm saying. Like, CEOs need to be held accountable. But if you're just going to flamethrower people and then hide in your basement, I'm really sorry. You need to come. I'm sorry. I just don't trust you. And that's maybe I'm a total maniac here, but like, I'm just not gonna. Your voice isn't as valuable to me at the table if you're only gonna lob it from afar and not look me face to face and have to hear my voice.
And I think as vitamins go and as nourishment goes, I don't know if it nourishes the movement and the actual thing. Like, the big thing of change and the big thing of moving forward, or actually trying to get people to amass people to your side, for lack of a better word. To actually see it. I think a lot of that can really muddy it up and actually create distraction and create actually resentment for a cause if it looks like it's being trivialized.
Right.
So,
and I don't know I don't know what works for everybody to move the thing forward. I don't know what's going to work. I just know, like, I can speak for myself. Like, I'm not going to speak for anybody else. I can tell you what works for me. Like, getting me on your side, shame and guilt, it's not that it never works. It's just, if you're going to come at me 10 times, guilt's only going to work one of them. And so make sure when you come at me, make sure when you come at me that you're 100% sure that that's the tool you want to use, because I don't want you to be surprised if I spend my time elsewhere. Like,
right.
That's the thing that's just hard to tell to people, and you can't do it on social media because it's just an inartful. Anyway, Adam, we will save this for another episode. I appreciate your time, and I
appreciate your time. Thanks for your patience today with me.
Man,
in general. Actually, you know what? Thanks for your patience every day with me.
I look forward to the reconvening of our senior coffees. Usually, my friend Mike and I, we do it in the morning at like 8 a.m. and you and I sort of fire ours up at about 11 p.m. So I'm really
exactly.
I'm grateful for this, and I will say, if I have one hope coming out of this pandemic, it's that you and I continue this sort of correspondence back and forth, and continue our sort of like private shit talking about the world, walled off from society, because I think it's important
to be your friend. And I think I've said it in every podcast, but it's something I feel every day. It really is a blessing. I'm so grateful to have your friendship, and yeah. So
back at you, sir.
Yeah, that's it.
Tell Francesco, I'm sorry that I mistook him for your tuner. I'll never do it again.
Oh, please. I'm sure he's delighted.
All right. Well, I love you, buddy. Take care. Man. Be safe, and we'll talk to you soon. See ya.
Bye.
Okay, I hope you enjoyed that conversation. This podcast was brought to you by Liquidrum, liquidrum.com, liquidrum.com, down in Waco, Texas, run by one of the founding members of So Percussion, Todd Behan. You'll laugh, you'll cry, the tambourine will become a part of you. Check it out, liquidrum.com. Also, all the steel drums I play and teach on at NYU and at Princeton and in So Percussion are built by Kyle Dunleavy. You can find his instruments at dunleavypans.com, DUNLEAVY pans.com. All right, talk to you soon. Take care. Be well. Be kind. See ya.